get started with our amazing event that we have for you today, just want to go over very quickly some guidelines to make sure that everyone has the best experience possible. First of all, just know that we are recording this event, but you're not going to appear in the video. We've muted everyone to make sure that you can all hear us loud and clear, but it does not mean that we don't want to hear from you. So we ask you to please use the chat if you want to drop any comments, introduce yourself. As you can see, a lot of people have done so already. And also, most importantly, if you have any questions for our guest today, please use the Q&A feature. That's at the bottom of your screen. So just want to make this super clear. Any question that you have that you want us to look at, please use the Q&A. That's where we're going to pull questions from. Finally, we have closed caption available for you today. So to turn it on, you click on the live transcription icon at the bottom of your screen, and you can select your preference. So quick agenda, really very simple agenda, but packed with exciting content. So first, we're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to then go into our main chat with our guest, Eli, and we're going to make sure to keep some time at the end for your questions. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can see full closure on Eli. So I'm Marilou. I'm a client success manager here at Meetup. And today we're having a conversation with Eli, who's a community manager of NetSquared. So he manages a global volunteer network for the nonprofit technology sector. And today Eli will share with us some views of, importance of community, explain how to engage volunteers around the world. And we're also going to talk about how him and his team has been leveraging the Meetup Pro tool. And so without further ado, Eli, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience today.
Hi there. Apparently it's going to be all about me today, so I'll keep this pretty quick. Hi there, I'm Eli. I'm based here in cloudy Vancouver, Canada, and I work with TechSoup, which is a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits get access to the technology tools and skills they need to go and actually do good in the world. And I have the world's best job because basically what I did is took my volunteer role managing the local chapter here in Vancouver, and now I actually get to support the 120-ish other chapters scattered across the globe. So every day I get to be a cheerleader and talk with passionate volunteers.
Amazing. And so I want to dive right into what you just said about your transition, because that's really incredible. So you became a Meetup organizer in 2009. And then only 3 years later, you ended up being a community manager for the entire program. So I just want to hear more about what in first place made you want to become a Meetup organizer, and how from there did you end up transitioning your entire career into the community space?
Well, this Meetup sent me on a whole new path. So I got involved with meetups because I was new in town, didn't really know anyone. And so I started going to other gatherings to try and find people who shared my passions, were nerdy in the same way that I was. And when I ran into the NetSquared Vancouver Tech for Good meetup, my mind, frankly, was blown. I'd never been in a place where there was nerdy people and change the world people in the same space. And I quickly said, this is what I want to do with my life. So I started going to the meetups. I was lucky that the leader of that group broke up with his girlfriend, left town, and then said, who wants to take over? And I guess I put my hand up because it solved all of my needs. It gave me a way for me to build a reputation in my community. Being a meetup leader gave me a way to ask anyone in town a question or a favor, because now it wasn't just me going up to them, but rather it's like, I want you to present for me and for my 50 other members. And so I had an easy way as a shy person to open up any door in town. And then over time, it also really turned into my social circle. I'm like, oh, these are my Tech for Good geeks. These are the people who get me. So that's really what kept me in that meetup. And that's why I got so engaged that at some point, the mothership said, like, what is up with this kid? Why is he so keen? Why don't we put him to work?
That's an incredible story, and it's really great to see what you've accomplished, since in the past 8 years with the network. So for everyone to know, the NetSquared program has over 70,000 members across 120 groups in 42 countries right now. So, there's definitely huge growth there. And we'd love to hear what was the story behind the program and how were you and the team and everyone able to grow at that global scale?
So like any kind of community, it's complicated. So we started up 13 years ago. And honestly, we started up because one of the employees at TechSoup had been one of the first 25 employees of Meetup in the early days. And so when he moved to San Francisco and got involved with TechSoup, he said, I know this cool platform that I think could allow us to really like scale up the impact in the education we're doing. And so we're like, all right. So basically it was on the whim of Billy Bickett that the whole program was launched. And the magic of this is very few programs last 13 years, but because it's all been run by volunteers, it's basically unkillable because it's just not that expensive to run. It's me and a Meetup subscription and the passion and leadership of each one of the local chapter leaders. So that's really been the secret of the community the whole way. And the other secret of our growth was we have been really low barrier the whole way. It's what I call sort of the spaghetti theory. So I've just got an open application form. If you answer 5 questions, I'm going to have a conversation with you. And then from there, I'm going to virtually throw you at the wall and see if you stick. Most of the time, people don't stick. So they wander off, they find another project in their world. But I'm looking for those pieces of sticky people who really get the program, are aligned with the values and the mission. And I basically, once I find those people, then I'm going to invest a lot of energy into them. So then I'll take them through training, then I'll connect them into the rest of the community. Then I'll basically, become their online best friend, follow them everywhere, be their cheerleader. And that's been the key piece of it. But you always hear about me being like the cheerleader. I'm never the person leading the community. The secret to our growth has been to give full ownership to each of the local meetups. So the group in Toronto, the group in London, the group in Nairobi, they come up with the topics, the timing, the shape of the community, the messaging. I'll give them templates and ideas, and everyone ignores it, which is totally fine because that sense of ownership is because they've shaped it themselves. It really is their project, and that's what has allowed the community to grow over the years.
That is so interesting, and I want to get more into the sticky spaghetti. These people. So the process of growing community and finding the right people. How do you identify new groups and how new groups pop up in getting more into that process of the sticky spaghetti?
So every time I try and go out and like recruit specifically, like I really want a group in Austin, I fail. It's never worked for me. What really has happened, the growth of the community has been word of mouth, honestly. So I've got Johnny Appleseeds and Jill Appleseeds wandering the world. I've got organizers who started in DC, started up a group. Then their career moved and they're like, oh, now I'm in Philadelphia. So they started another group. And then they moved on like, oh, now I'm in Portland. And they start their third group. And so as they transition, leadership teams emerge. So each one of those prior groups continues. But I've got like these people who wander the globe, starting up new groups as they go. And then the other way that word of mouth happens is we've got someone who, again, was maybe just a member of the group in Vancouver. Then they moved to Montreal and they said like, well, I had this really cool meetup in Vancouver. Why isn't it here? And some percentage of those people are curious enough that they show up on my website and say, ask me the question. They say, well, why isn't it here? And I'm like, because you haven't done it yet. And that's where the real good leaders are coming from. They're coming because they've had an experience and then they've moved on, or sometimes they've been referred to by another organizer who will say, I know someone in San Diego who would blow your mind. You need to have this person in your community. And we bring them in So it's really been relationship based that has brought new organizers into the community.
That's really interesting. So really key is to be curious about your network, and then really looking, about who are these active members who could potentially step up, and being available and fuel. And, you said that you're a cheerleader, so really supporting them. So being aware of any opportunity of a growing leader who's just waiting to have a hand and, support to grow to the next step.
Totally. And I'll give them tools and like, here's an intro email. But what I find is they're better at selling the role than I am. You know, so I let them leverage their relationship and their knowledge of the people they're trying to recruit on our behalf. But the other part of the process is knowing that of those new leads that come in, if I'm lucky, 25% of them will actually launch a group. I have an enormous, huge failure rate on initial application to actually launching a group, which comes back to that spaghetti technique, which is to say, like, given that there's this high percentage of failure, and here I am 10 years later, and I still have no idea when someone first comes in if they're going to like actually launch a group or not. I can't tell. It's so mysterious to me. So I need a lot of people coming through to do that conversion to actual group launch.
Right. So a lot of call out as well of like, we want more people, like, we need leaders. So really be vocal about that, so that the right people will hear and then we'll go through the process.
100%. Like, at a local chapter level, I begin and end every single one of my events with we're a group of volunteers doing this cool thing, but it's not going to happen just with us. So, I'm recruiting at the beginning and end of every event. And again, it's sort of the spaghetti technique. If I have 10 people who say, like, I'd be interested in getting involved, I'm like, awesome. I'm going to add you to our little mailing list or to our Slack. And 80% of them will never do anything beyond that. But some of them will. And so those are the people I'll then invest time and love in.
I love that. I love that. So really just keep on talking about it, and people over time will just hear the message and join. And speaking of, different tactics of, growing the network, I want to get into more the deeds of Meetup, the platform. What are some features that you found the most valuable for you in that work of growing your network?
Well, when you show up in town and don't know anyone, Meetup is magic because it's this marketing and acquisition engine. Like, there are thousands of people joining Meetup every day. And because, you're eventually looking to do that matching of interests and keywords. And so, my group in Vancouver has got over 3,000 members. I did no proactive marketing around that. That was all just Meetup doing its magic, and also having, some word of mouth from the attendees. So that's really been like the most important part to us in Meetup. Was it brought new people in, and it just made the process easy. It automatic reminders and all that. So that is a key part of Meetup that helped at a local chapter level. It used to be that when I wanted to message the people of the 100 plus chapters we work with, I would have to open up 100 tabs and copy and paste a message into each one of them to message people. This was totally maddening. Luckily, a couple of years ago, Meetup Pro emerged into this world. And if you're part of a larger network of like 20 plus meetups, it's life changing, because it allows you to do some pretty important things. Base level, it allows you to do messaging. You're like, send it to all the meetups in the UK. There's a cool conference coming up. You cut and paste and click send. Hours of my life saved. Like, game changer, totally amazing. But even more important is when you're in the Meetup Pro world, you have access to data, and you can do so many things once you have access to just a place where you say, like, give me a spreadsheet of all the groups that have held an event in the last 3 months. Because now you can say, like, okay, who's active, and then also who's not active. And so I'm going through on basically a monthly basis and going through and doing those data exports, uploading that data back into my own database, my own CRM. And then from there, I'm starting to say, like, well, let's set out this trigger of 3 emails to all my inactive group leaders. Or if someone has said, like, oh, I see someone created an account 3 months ago, maybe I'm going to automate the trigger email saying, could you give me your address? I want to send you a thank you letter. So you can start doing this deeper engagement with your members, but you can't do that until you start like putting that into your database. And you can't do that without Meetup Pro. Like that's what gives you access to that data export.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, and so for anyone in the audience, Meetup Pro is a tool that we have available for businesses. So if you're looking to grow from one chapter to multiple chapter in this case, NetSquared is 120 groups around the world. So we have this tool that is available for businesses that want to lead more than just one group. And want to go back into, you talked a lot about the volunteer. So the key, and I think that can be true for a global network or also just your own group. How do you keep people who are volunteer and run groups? And that can be just your local group or an entire network again. Just the concept of having people devoting time to something. You talked about passion, but how do you, as the community manager, keep them engaged and motivated over time?
Well, I don't have money to offer them. So, so it is always about trying to offer them the other things that motivate them. So I talked about my own experience when I first got involved with the chapter here in Vancouver. And for me, I was looking for a way to build my reputation. And so, so whenever I bring a new leader in, we have a phone call and we start talking about what do you want to get out of the experience? Because some people are there because they are building a consultancy business and they want to build a reputation. Other people are there because they're looking for a social outlet. They just want to go for a drink and complain about their boss with other people who understand. Or maybe people are there because they want to make a real difference in the world and they want to make sure that these training events happen so nonprofits can make more impact using technology. So we really go deep into the motivations. And it's a little bit different for every person, but based on that motivation, we then say like, well, based on that, here's how we think we could create your group. Because the motivation is going to change who you really want in the room, who you're going to recruit, what kinds of presenters you want. Is it workshops? Is it presentations? Like all of those things sort of cascade out of the motivations, because my goal has always been that I want someone in this role 2 years from now. Because my nightmare is someone creates two amazing, perfect, polished events, and then they burn out and leave. I'm like, well, that's no good for the community. Like, there's just another flash in the pan. That's like a conference. We don't need that. We're looking. A meetup is an ongoing experience where people can come to build relationships. So it's that matching of the organizer need with what they're creating in the meetup that really keeps them there over the long term. But because my job ultimately is not so much about the motivation. It is mostly about giving people permission. About half the people I talk to when they do their onboarding call, they say like, I've been thinking about doing something like this for, I don't know, like the last 3 years, and I just never got around to it. But when they run into a community, they get to be inspired and peer pressured with a little bit of competition, because suddenly they say like, oh, these 50 other group leaders, they're doing it themselves. And here's how they're doing it. I'm just going to cut and paste their approach, like, and do it in my own city. Um, and then also they've got me basically as the gentle motivator of if you don't do anything, I will gently poke you in the ribs. And no one wants a poking in the ribs, even if it's gentle. So that's the other thing that sort of keeps people motivated, is just like, oh, I guess I don't want to disappoint that weird guy I see on Zoom.
I love that. I love that. The peer pressure and making sure that you're supporting the community. So really great. I love that. Really going deep into what motivates people to become volunteer and run groups, and then feeding on that motivation. And just like really quickly, I'm just curious, like for you as the organization, what type of support do you give to like each of these 120 groups that form the larger community? What support do you provide them?
Basically nothing. I often joke, and it's mostly true, that if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, half of my group leaders wouldn't notice for 6 months. They're so independent. It's the power of the community is once they're up and running, they're doing their own thing. They're not waiting for me to give them permission and do anything after that. But what we actually offer them is one, the core piece, a meetup.com subscription, a way to manage community, to message, to post events, to basically keep the whole thing running. I also take all the best practices from other group leaders, copy and paste them, clean it up a little bit, and put it in our onboarding materials in a Zendesk site. And then there's a Slack group and a Facebook group where the other organizers hang out, share their slides and their best practices, and basically inspire each other while I try and keep out of the way. But that's honestly the core of it. Otherwise, it's really mostly a self-running machine, as is each local meetup. Anyone here who's a local meetup knows that, like, what keeps it going? It's you. You're the one who makes it happen. It's not so much someone breathing down your neck.
Love it. Okay, now I'm gonna ask you. So you've been doing this community, management work for over 8 years at this point. So, what are some key learnings that now, looking back, really helped you be successful in your role?
What have I learned? Well, I've learned a couple things around it. One, be really patient. We're working with volunteers. They've got busy lives. And sometimes you'll have someone, in fact, I had someone just today who first applied back in 2018. And there they are talking with me today in January of 2021, just now starting up the group. Sometimes it takes a while for people to finally carve the space out in their life. But what have I really learned? It's been flexibility. It's been flexibility to let groups lead with their event styles. It's been flexibility on language as a unilingual jerk, which is very shaming as a Canadian. I've have had to sort of be flexible to work with regional champions who will actually sort of act as the onboarding and support person in their own language. We've got francophones, we've got a Spanish lead who sort of helps us with that. And the other thing I've learned, the painful way is moving money internationally is basically just not possible. It's just impossible. We occasionally have these micro grants, and I will try and move money to India, or I'll try and move money to Kenya. And basically what happens is I look really suspicious to all the money transfer services. So I'm now banned on MoneyGram and on Western Union. And if I'm not careful, I'm sure a third one will be there as well. I look very suspicious.
Oh boy. Yeah, transferring money internationally sounds complicated. And tied to this question, I want for the audience a bit more from your own experience. So I have a quote here from Eleanor Roosevelt who said, "Learn from the mistakes of others because you can't live long enough to make them all yourself." And that's so true. So can you share maybe 2 or 3 mistakes that you've made at leading a community, and what lessons you can get out of this?
Yeah. So I think I keep on being really stubborn, and then reality walks up to me and slaps me across the face and says, like, "Hey, that's not how it is." Um, you know, so we had all these things. Like, I used to be so positive that as people came in as leaders, that the entry point should be really low to start a group. So I was like, if you come to me with just one event idea, I'll fire up a meetup for you, and off you go. But actually, what I found is I was just creating lots of meetups, which had one event and disappeared from the world. So eventually I said, like, okay, maybe I need to raise my barriers. So now I have a rule, which is to say, before we'll create a meetup for you, you need to give me your outline of your first 3 events. And shockingly, I actually made that transition, and now I actually end up with more successfully launched groups. Like, adding that barrier there was actually really important. Um, or I swore and have sworn until basically, the day COVID hit, that our community members didn't want online events. I'm like, they signed up for Meetup. They're in-person people. Like, it's Meetup. And anyways, aren't there lots of great webinars out there already? The answer is yes, there are a lot of great webinars out there, but people were really hungry for their community. They wanted to keep reconnecting with the people they've been talking with, the relationships they've been building over their years of membership with their local Meetup chapter. So actually, people do want to go to online events. So I was super duper wrong, and honestly have spent so much energy and time being wrong about that. Um, and then I was really certain that my chapter leaders wanted super independence from the TechSoup mothership, the brand, the nonprofit that sort of supports and covers the cost of all the meetups. But actually, they keep on telling me in surveys that they want to be much closer to the mothership. They want to really help carry forward our mission. So me being wrong over and over again.
But learning from it, which that's really where growth and magic happens, is where you can recognize some errors and from there grow. So really appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing these learnings with us. And speaking of the shift to online, the pandemic has brought a lot of new community trends. And that's something that I'm always interested in asking to people that lead a large community. So again, in your case, you ultimately interact with over 70,000 members directly or indirectly. So quickly, what are some trends that you've seen through events, through the way that people engage right now on Meetup?
I think I'm not going to say anything radical and new for people who are also doing these, but lesson number one, never go over an hour. We find that everyone disappears off the Zoom at the 1 hour mark. So we just are now have a hard limit on the length. The other thing that we have seen is we are actually getting in this online space more attendees per event than we would for the live events, which I guess shouldn't be shocking because now we can just reach people we never reached before, but still surprised me. And then the other thing that I've seen trend-wise is we're struggling as a global community to bring online events into all territories. There are just some countries where, like, in Cameroon, my organizer just does not have access to the reliable bandwidth to do online events. And I don't have a good solution for that, unfortunately. That's just a problem we are struggling with.
All right, so I'm just checking time. So just want to say, telling people, reminder, you can use the Q&A function. So you see there's a little icon at the bottom. So if you want to add any question to our Q&A, I have a couple more questions for our guests, but we also want to hear from you. So just before we transition to Q&A, just remind people to use this function to drop your questions. And my next question for you, Eli, is, the pandemic has impacted everyone. We all know that, the strategies and everything, all the planning that we had. So, just curious to hear in what way the pandemic impacted your own community strategy for 2021, and what are you the most excited about in the upcoming year?
Well, cliche time, it's crisis and opportunity. So our COVID friend has forced a real restart on our community and given us a chance, as things really slowed down, especially for the first couple months, to look at what we've created over 13 years and say, well, what would we clean up? What would we change? And so I think the first obvious change we're going to more formally embrace and put more supports in for doing online events in addition to in-person events. I think even when we're allowed to come together, we're going to continue to have another flavor, which will be online events. I think that's a permanent part of who we are. And the other side of that is, as we move to online, geography doesn't always have to become the defining characteristic of our communities. Rather, we're looking now at launching verticals for nonprofits who care about tech around things like addressing domestic violence or food insecurity. So we get to bring people who care maybe about more around an issue area and then say, like, well, let's make a community out of that rather than a community just around San Jose.
I love that. Can you also, I feel like I've just saw a few questions. Can you share a bit more about what, so we talked about NetSquared, your program, and TechSoup. And just to make it extra clear, can you share a bit more about what TechSoup is and what NetSquared is?
Sure, a lot of names, a lot of brand soup. So yeah, thank you. And I sometimes skip over it because I'm bored of it because I talk about it all day long. So TechSoup is one of the world's coolest organizations. It's a nonprofit organization that has partnered with about 120 of the major technology companies in the world to basically allow them to scale their in-kind donation and discount programs. So what it looks like is a nonprofit creates their free account and says like, okay, I'm a nonprofit, here's my proof. Basically, you've written your micro grant application. And then they can use that exact same proof, that same credential for any of those 120 corporate partners with technology products to get instant validation of their request. And so we have partners like Microsoft, like Google. So you'd go to Google for like the Google Ad Grants credits for $10,000 of free ad grant credits every month. Or you would go to, say, Zoom, the product we're using right now, and as a nonprofit, you get a 50% discount. And it just becomes like quick and easy, instant, basically almost any nonprofit's eligible. So that's the magic of what TechSoup does. And because it's global, at this point, we've served over 1 million nonprofits and saved the sector about $14 billion in fees, which is kind of ridiculous. So that's what they do. So that's the first part. TechSoup makes the technology available to nonprofit organizations. The next part of it is, well, what do you do with that technology? And there's webinars, and there's forums, and there's all kinds of supports. But we know, as community people in this room, that sometimes the best way to learn is to come together face to face or in small groups of peers and share best practices, or get inspired by what someone else did down the street. Because it's great to show your boss like, oh yeah, the United Way did this cool thing, but they're like, that's fine, but they're over there and we're a small organization over here. So those local case studies of like, here's the impact made by technology by this peer organization that and are kind of a rival with their executive director. That's the power of what we're doing within these Tech for Good meetups.
Thank you so much for clarifying this. I think it was like a lot of people appreciated having more context there. And we're going to transition to our Q&A. We've got a few questions and want to make sure to cover the questions from the audience. So Drake asked, what is the goal you would like to achieve through the creation of community? If to help other NGOs, he said, then how?
So I think we've got a couple reasons to the answer to the question, why does NetSquared exist? And I think there's a couple answers. One answer is it's a bit of an acquisition engine for us. So we know that TechSoup has like each half of the nonprofits in the US are TechSoup members. That means the other half aren't, which means they're not using their free account to save money on technology, which means they're throwing their money away. That makes us sad. And so NetSquared is one of the ways we can start reaching those grassroots nonprofits who haven't yet discovered TechSoup. But the other part of that is mission delivery. To say, if our mission as an organization is to make sure that nonprofits also successfully implement technology, well, then one of the best ways we can do that is to get people together in a room. And there's two elements to that. One of those is they're going to go to a workshop and we're going to say like, here's 3 great tools you could use to create social media graphics for your next campaign. And we give them a quick introduction, tell them how to find the tools, guide them on its use. That's useful at some level. It sort of helps organizations. But the other part of that is we give them a community of practice. So you go to an event and you start having a conversation with the person next to you. And you find out like, oh, you're also trying to build an internet. How's that going for you? And they're like, well, okay, but here's the things I learned. And then they might come back the next month and say like, oh, actually, we did a couple other things. And here's the other things I've learned from it. And so we're building this place where people can come together, can meet with consultants who can help them, meet with peer nonprofits who can help guide them and inspire them, and also just give people who in the technology industry are looking for a way to engage with nonprofits as volunteers or maybe transitioning into that sector as employees. It also gives them a chance to build relationships within the sector.
How That's how you're seeing like how important community is, right? The connection to others to open up new opportunities and sharing the knowledge and all these tips. That's really incredible. Someone is asking, how do you evaluate your teammates' performance from all over the world and ensure that their group and meetups comply with your overall organization's core values?
Loosely, I would say. The answer is it's an ongoing process. So we designed the NetSquared program to be really in this hub and spoke model, where we would provide loose guidance from the middle, but ultimately the end decisions at the for the local chapters are really led by the local organizers. And that goes to the extent of they don't come to me before they publish an event and say, what do you think about this topic? Rather, I see it magically pop up on Meetup. And in that twice a year case where I'm like, that's a little to the side, I'll come after the fact and say, like, let's have a conversation, how we can just sort of steer you closer. But I think we designed a program for a high tolerance of failure. And that happened in a couple ways. One, you'll see that there's TechSoup, the mothership, and then there's NetSquared over on the side here. And that was intentional at the program's creation because we knew that sometimes volunteers were going to do something that maybe wasn't 100% aligned with what we were prioritizing as an organization. And giving them a separate brand space gave them some room to do things that were just a little bit aside from what we would have done. But I think the main piece is this orientation calls we do at the beginning. So we have a call with every single person who comes in and says, I want to start a group. And we go deep into really about motivations, what keeps them there. As I talked about, it's always about like, why are you doing this? What do you want to create? Those meetings, frankly, are not very much about how to run events. I'm like, there's a guide over there, have fun figuring out how to run events, but we don't spend a lot of time on that. We really do spend most of our time trying to make sure that we are as aligned as possible. And then we give them some guidelines, but the guidelines are really thin. The guidelines are like, it should be once a quarter or better. It should be about technology and nonprofits, and it should be low barrier. And then fourth, here's our code of conduct. Don't be a jerk about it. But we give people a lot of rope to hang themselves. But mostly in my 8 years, I've had to hang 2 people in that time. Like mostly people, they get it. And I don't know why, but people, I think when you give them extended trust, they meet it.
Yeah, I think that's true, like sometimes if the macro management concept, people have more involvement in what they're doing, and so they want to make sure that they do it right. Thank you for sharing that. I think there's a lots of good takeaways that what you just said. Transitioning to our next question from Sarah, she asked, was wondering which platform or tooling you or your community uses for running your online events. So
Great
hosting,
question.
yeah.
So when COVID hit, we were like, uh-oh, what are we gonna do? I work for a nonprofit. I was not going to offer a full Zoom Pro license to each one of my 120 chapters. Like that just wasn't practical on the timelines we were working with, which was like, what can we do next week? All of our groups are having to go from live to like, oh, online. We're like, all right, what do we figure that out? So we have leaned into Zoom. And the way we manage that is basically I create like sort of an open Zoom link. It's like a Zoom room. Um, and so what organizers do is they actually just go to a calendar that I've got and just say they like, okay, I claim this time for the room. And then they get an email saying like, okay, great, here's the link for your Zoom room. And then for security purposes, they then get a follow-up email with, here's the code you would use to claim the host role for that Zoom. Because if it's during work hours, I'll show up, say hello for 5 minutes, give them the host role. But otherwise, if it's at a time when I'm supposed to be asleep, I sort of send them the host code and they manage it that way. It is imperfect, but it's worked surprisingly well, honestly.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. That's a good way of, yeah, giving access to a lot of people to Zoom in a cheap way. So looking at time, I have one last burning question that I want to ask you. For people who maybe right now are considering becoming organizer or want to have tips to convince other people to become organizers, um, in all your experience, what advice would you give to someone interested in becoming organizer?
Well, first of all, this is the only piece of advice I give anyone, which is when someone comes to me and says like, hey, like I'm new in town, I'm building a career, what should I do? I always answer, as I guess now the old person, is that they should create their own meetup. It's honestly the very best thing you can do, because if you want to become an expert, if you want to know all the key players in your sector, if you want to have everyone think that you're the smartest cookie in town, hosting a meetup is the very best way to do it. So say you're a massage therapist, you should create the massage therapy meetup, because now you're going to know all the other massage therapists. You're going to bring them in, hear all their great ideas. Everyone who attends and now thinks that you know everything that the presenter said, even if you don't. You get this weird like rubbing off of expertise. And now you've got this huge referral network too. All those people are like, I'm too busy, but you should talk with this other great person. There's nothing better for your career development than launching a meetup. So whatever you're passionate about, you should host that meetup. Like, because no one else is going to do it if you don't. There's nothing better for you. Having coached about 100 groups to launch at this point, making that number up, who knows, but it seems like a reasonable number. Here's what I would recommend to you as an organizer, which is to keep your events real simple. Think of it as like in like the technology world, they have this idea of the minimum viable product, which is to say, what is the least you can do to get yourself to a group? Because I think a successful meetup is less perfect events, but on a regular cadence. It's the cadence which is going to be your secret to community growth, rather than doing 2 events a year. They're not going to remember who you are. But if you say, I'm here every 6 weeks like clockwork, same day, same time, people get it and they start showing up there. And that's when your community will start growing. So stay, what is the absolute minimum I can do that gets me over the line to group exists? The other part of that is you need to lean on your network. Put everyone you know to work. Ask everyone you know who's been your colleagues, your co-presenters, your dentist. Name a person you want that person to be involved with your meetup. So recruit them as a presenter. Maybe they just can be an advisor. Maybe they just like taking notes and they should be in your events taking notes so you can sort of share the learnings after the fact. But put everyone you know to work, and just be a little bit obnoxious about it. Ask, ask, ask. And then finally is that thing I talked about, which is my orientation interview, which is you need to be super clear about your own expectations. What do you want to get from this to make it a sustainable experience? Because frankly, running a meetup is hard and there's a high chance of burnout. Like, it's not the easiest thing in the world. It's an ongoing commitment. It's not a one-timer. So one, keep it really simple, but then two, make sure that you design your meetup so it meets your needs. Because then maybe no one else shows up. Maybe it's 3 people who show up, but as long as you designed it so that you were going to learn something from it because it was about something you were curious about, well, then you still succeeded. So make sure that you're a little bit selfish about how you design the events and what events you actually schedule.
Wow, I love these advices. So we're out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much, Eli, for all the great insights. This has been really incredible, really great conversation with you. Really appreciate your time and being willing to share all good learnings and also mistakes through your years. I want to go ahead and just share one more thing. So before we all go, Meetup recently launched our first podcast. So we're really, really excited about that. So just wanted to put that here, asking everyone if you love our content, you love hearing our guests, people incredible like Eli that have amazing experience. If you want to hear more, we have our new podcast, so you can use the barcode here. And we recorded this event, so if you'd like to review it or share it with your friends, we'll be sharing it on our blog, so you'll have access to the recording and also a summary. So that's it for us. Happy Global Engagement Community Day. Thank you, Eli, once again. It was really great to see you, and stay well, everyone. Until next time.
Thank you. See you all.